So let's talk about the situation on ground where you have the healthcare workers and caregivers at the front lines of the ongoing fight against coronavirus. Added to these are pharmaceuticals, biotechnology companies, research firms, and others. But reports since the outbreak of COVID-19 shows that consumers' protection is also needed. And the man leading that campaign in Nigeria is Babatunde IRUKERA, the new Director General of the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, known as the FCCPC. Mr. IRUKERA joins us now on Arise Exchange. A good evening to you, sir. Welcome to the program.
Good evening. Thank you very much.
Great. So let's talk about the first half 2020 operational report of your agency.
Well, okay. Thank you very much. It's been an unusual year, and I think that is the case all over the world. We had a different trajectory planned for the year. The current legislation under which we operate came into force in January 2019. And so we had spent the whole of 2019 kind of building up the capacity and also doing some advocacy work and somewhat letting industry and the market know that starting 2020, stronger enforcement of the new provisions of the law would be the order of the day. However, just as we started the year, as we all know, material changes occurred with COVID-19. And so what we had to do was immediately transition into a pandemic period operations, both from the competition standpoint and the consumer protection standpoint. And so we created a new COVID period protocol, which existed through the lockdown and in some parts still exists now. And what that did for the M&A part of our work is we prioritized failing firms and COVID-related mergers and acquisition and created a remote method of filing those applications and a strike force to prioritize those applications. With respect to anti-competitive practices in the market, we issued directives and guidance on how firms could collaborate and our perception of what might otherwise be termed anti-competitive and how we would treat them if there were coordinated conduct with respect to issues that could affect COVID, especially manufacturing, distribution, and retailing of healthcare products and medicines. On the consumer protection side, we created a COVID team, and so that when the government was shutting down and everybody staying at home, we had a team that was doing monitoring, surveillance, and enforcement. And we realized that there were a few areas. One was price gouging. Before the shutdown, right after the index case in Nigeria was discovered, we issued a first advisory about price gouging. We followed it up with a further advisory. And as we saw that the situation was getting really bad, we initiated investigation, concluded investigation, and began the prosecution of about 4 supermarket or pharmacy chains. That prosecution is ongoing. In addition to that, we've seen that there's a new wave of gouging that is occurring now, even though there's been some stability for a while. And the new wave seems to be with respect to certain medications that have been presented as potentially efficacious against COVID-19. And so we reopened investigations quite recently and had a site investigation in Port Harcourt, Abuja, and Lagos on the same day, and some of the large pharmacies that had multiple offices. The other thing that we saw from a consumer protection standpoint is broadband. And with everything moving online, whether it's buying food, socializing, schooling, commerce, and everything, it became quite a problem. The traffic was intense, and so the speed was a problem, and there were lots of complaints. We've been engaging with the NCC and telecommunications companies. As a matter of fact, we have another meeting planned to address key issues between us, the NCC, and senior level executives of the telecommunications companies. The other thing we saw were banking transactions, a lot of failed transactions or significant complaints about online banking and ATM operations. And so we have a task force that is addressing pure banking issues, and we've done quite well with that. But it's very clear that we must move to a point where we're not just resolving complaints, but industry-wide intervention that would prevent these ongoing problems. So that essentially has been our COVID approach response. We continue to do other daily work, but I'm not sure that that is nearly as newsworthy as what we've done during the COVID period. Thank you.
Very interesting. So what specific challenges has the FCCPC, your agency, faced in this consumer protection under the COVID-19 environment?
It's interesting you would ask that. I mean, our challenges are not dissimilar to some of what is happening in other parts of the world. For one, the first challenge we experienced, especially with respect to price gouging, was a pushback from the elite, I'd say the elites of a country, who thought that there was absolutely no basis for any regulatory intervention in prices in a free market. But over a period of time, I think everybody realized that it's a global standard that price gouging is inappropriate conduct and it's exploitative. And so our advocacy in that area has worked. The next problem is just the kind of knowledge that is required of people who are operating in the market to know what conduct violates the law or not. Many do not know that price gouging is a violation of law. And some who know just felt that there was really no enforcement mechanism around that. And so that has been quite a challenge. And in an environment where a lot of the markets are informal, it's very difficult to manage that process. But we've succeeded somewhat by making examples of those who we have investigated and are prosecuting. And so we're getting quite some traction in that area. Another challenge has been capacity. And so you have an agency of 247 people in about 9 offices across the country. And you've got 774 local governments and 200 million people across the country. And so at a time of a pandemic like this, with panic buying and all kinds of things, and opportunists also looking at this as an opportunity for them to take advantage of people, it became very clear that we really needed to do a lot more. And so that has been a challenge for us, and we're doing the best we can in the circumstances, considering that even our little human resource talents needed to be depleted by the closure when the federal government asked some people to work from home or some to even go home completely. But one of the things we've used to try and overcome this is technology. We're holding a lot of online meetings and conducting some of our investigations even by Zoom, and meetings with trade associations. And the other thing that I would say is a challenge is that operators in Nigeria, and I suspect in most other parts of the world, they're quite skilled in concealing some of what are the worst problems that exist. And in the absence of the boots on the ground to really follow through on the many complex and dynamic pieces in this investigation, sometimes we're a little behind, but we're doing the best we can in the circumstances.
Our conversation with you, the FCCPC Chief Executive, continues in part 2 after the break. Dr. BABATUNDE IRUKERA, stand by. We'll be right back with you. Let's continue the conversation with BABATUNDE IRUKERA of the FCCPC. It took office over about a year ago, but the agency he superintends today was not it's not the same as was the predecessor, which was basically Consumer Protection Council. So how has the FCCPC, Consumer Rights and Fair Business Competition, been handled under the current circumstances? This second part of the conversation is very interesting. Dr. IRUKERA, thank you very much for standing by. Let's continue this chat. The question I'm asking you next about the lessons you're learning on the field about business ethics, consumer protection, and all that in Nigeria.
Well, first, let's make no mistake about it. Many times business do not consider morality. Some do, but many don't. And fundamentally, businesses are necessarily predatory if they get the opportunity to. What I have seen in the period that I've been in this role is that it is a consequence management system that holds businesses and people accountable. Almost every time something goes wrong with a business and they come into my office, the longest part of their presentation is their CSR. And what they're doing, the corporate social responsibility, how they're contributing to the nation and the communities where they find themselves. And I think that that's fine. I encourage businesses to do that, and I think you should be rewarded for doing that from a reputational standpoint. But every time, I've also said to the businesses that I demand the CSR. I truly, really demand CSR from you, but not your corporate social responsibility, which is purely aspirational and entirely a matter of choice. The CSR I demand from companies is a corporate statutory responsibility. You've got to comply with the law. It's only when you comply with the law that your reputation on account of your CSR would be good. And quite frankly, if businesses comply with the law, sometimes what they provide by CSR would already have been addressed in the whole proper statutory framework. So what I've discovered is that businesses would like to get away with whatever they can. And some are ethical, but most really just focused on their bottom line by any means possible. And I have realized that it's the regulatory framework that must hold them accountable. And we're doing that. We're doing that every day. I think the landscape has changed. Businesses recognize more than ever before in Nigeria, from a competition and certainly from a consumer protection standpoint, that there are consequences and repercussions. And when I say consequences and repercussions, we're not necessarily holding a bat in our hands and whacking businesses on the upside of their heads or anything. But people need to know that when there's a violation, you're going to have to be confronted with it, and you're going to have to deal with whatever the outcome is. And so I think the best way to put it is something a senior business executive said to me recently, when he said, well, you know, these are some of the most difficult times for us from what we can get away with, but it's also one of the most comforting times for us from knowing that the consequence management system is clear, transparent, and stable.
So I'm sure there's been a bit of some overlap in your operations with other agencies. Are you getting interagency cooperation?
Oh, yes. And there's absolutely nothing we do that doesn't have an overlap or the other, whether it's a consumer protection area or the competition area. Any business combination in any particular industry requires some clarity and clearance from the sector regulator. Most consumer protection-related issues also require some cooperation, contribution, or participation of the sector regulator. And so we're working on that on a daily basis. Every now and then, we encounter some stiffness, the regular tough battles and the distrust that can occur even intra-government everywhere in the world. But over a period of time, we're building that mutual trust and learning to work together even better.
You've been seeing in pictures and images entering stores wearing face masks and other things, and acting like the days of the Prohibition era in the U.S. Against the untouchables, as it were, if you watch those movies or so. How are you coping with that particular part of your job in which you're leading from the front? You're not just sending your staff to those locations. You are entering shops yourself as the Director General. And how are you coping with all of that, including your staff?
Well, I wish we had the powers of the Prohibition era and that companies were nearly as afraid of us as they were at that time. Our work would be far easier. But my sense of why I do some of the enforcement with my colleagues at the Commission is very clear. I think that every time I've been with my colleagues, the one thing that is very clear is that we'll get the attention of the operators much quicker, and they pay a lot more attention. And that is important, and it's a culture that we have to reinforce. So we'll build it for a time until it is not required. But secondly, I think from my combination of training and experience, I have some of the knowledge that is required. For instance, going into a retail store, when I arrived in the United States, before I qualified as a lawyer there, I cleaned stores, I did retailing. From going into a distribution warehouse, I also knew how to, I operated a forklift.
Now we get the background. Now we get the background. You're a lawyer of the Supreme Court in Nigeria and also operated in the United States. Thank you so much, Dr. Babatunde IRUKERA of the FCCPC. We'll continue this conversation some next time.